In the last video, we talked about multiple intelligence theory and how it was linked to making cordage. This time, we're going to take multiple intelligence theory and simplify it into 4 components, actually 5: visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. So the VARK inventory that you took in class, we're actually going to apply that to the skill for this day. So now we're going to get into knot tying. And you'll notice that this cordage is reverse wrapped. It's cotton fibers and it's reverse wrapped. So in your intro, what I want you to talk about is, of those learning styles we just mentioned, visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic, which ones would be the most important to complete this task? So obviously, visual is going to be important. Kinesthetic is going to be important. And if you're teaching somebody else to do this, then that auditory component is going to be extremely important as well. Now, the first knot we're going to use is going to be the clove hitch. I'm going to show you one way to tie it. There are multiple ways, but I'm going to show you the easiest way that's going to have the most applications for primitive fire making. So for a clove hitch, you're going to take or put a bend in the rope, and you're going to take your right hand to your left hand, and that makes a loop. I'm going to repeat that same process. Notice how I'm using my index finger to create a bend in the rope, and then I repeat that process to make a secondary loop. Take the loop in your right hand, place it behind the loop in your left hand, and then slide it over the object. And then you'll dress the knot by cinching it down. And you'll notice on one side, it makes an X pattern. So that's how to do the knot. Now, what learning styles were most important? So what learning styles were most important to make this clove hitch? Visual, obviously, if you were learning this or trying to teach it to somebody, that visual component is going to be huge. Kinesthetic, once they go through the process and actually try it out, that's going to ingrain it into muscle memory if they practice it enough. And then that auditory component, to really give it a good description. Combining all 3 of those would be an effective way to learn how to tie a clove hitch. Now, if you were learning this skill, for me at least, reading and writing about it are not going to do me a lot of good. I'm going to need to actually see it and visually perform the skill to get it down. Now for this video, we're going to cover 3 separate knots. Now I've got the clove hitch, but to keep it from shaking loose, especially if we're going to use this on a hand drill, which would be our next skill, you can put half hitches in. So what I did is I made 1 loop on that side, and I'm going to pull that through in the direction that it was cinched down. So let me show that process again. So I'm making a loop here, and I'm bringing it underneath the stick. And then I'm taking the end of that, and I'm sliding it back through. And so then what that's doing is giving me a couple of half hitches. And you'll start to see this pattern form. So you see me kind of pulling on that, and then pulling back towards myself. So I'm pulling away, and then I'm pulling back towards myself, and you'll get this nice pattern. That's one problem with the clove hitch, is it's real easy to shake loose. But that's also an advantage, because once you cinch it down on something, it's real easy to untie. So now I'm putting a loop here. I'm going under the stick, and I'm going to slide that end back through that loop and pull it towards me. So I'm going to just show you how to put a couple more half hitches in. So you can see the importance of that visual and kinesthetic action and the description. If I just showed you alone, some people could get that down, but others are going to need a visual description. So I brought that underneath. Notice how direction of the pull, it goes underneath the stick, and I take the end. Now I did 2 half hitches above and 2 half hitches below. That's more than enough. And that is a clove hitch with several half hitches, 2 below and 2 above. And what'll happen is if we were using this as a hand drill, which is too thick to use as a hand drill, if I only did a clove hitch and we went back and forth, it's going to shake loose. Now it's less likely to shake loose, and I can easily cinch it down and tighten it back up and untie it once a load has been placed on it. So another knot we're going to need for future classes is a double figure 8 on a butt. And we're going to need this for the hand drill. We'll also need it for other activities. It's beneficial anytime you want to put a loop at the end of a rope. This is great because if you used other knots and put a lot of pressure on it, it would be hard to untie. And sometimes you just have to cut somebody out of the rope, especially if you used any other knot for climbing. That's why they typically will use either a figure 8 follow through or a figure 8 on a bight like this for climbing to tie into a harness or to clip somebody into a harness. So to do this knot, you're going to take the end of that loop and try to keep it together as if it were one rope. So you notice here, I'm taking those 2 strands over the first 2, right? Now I'm going to go underneath and back through the top. Don't come through the bottom, go back through the top. And I'll do that a couple times so that you can see. And it's called a figure 8. So I'm going to dress this down a little bit so that you can kind of see. And you can check your work because it should count up to 10. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. You should have 10 strands there. All right, so I'm going to untie that again. Now, let's talk about it in terms of learning style. What's most important here? Well, again, visual is extremely important. Kinesthetic, actually going through the process, seeing it alone might be enough for some people, especially if they have experience with knots. But actually going through the process is more helpful. So seeing it and then combining it with kinesthetic learning. And then if you have a visual description about what's going on here, like if you just watch this, it may not be obvious what I'm doing. So I'm going over the initial strands. Then I'm going to come underneath, right? So I went underneath those strands. And I'm going back through the top side. And then I'm going to cinch that down, dress it down, and make it nice and pretty. And that'll be easy to untie. So that was the figure 8 follow through. Now another knot we're going to need, and this one's pretty easy, is a lark's head. So I bring my fingers inside, I overlap that, and we're going to use that, especially when we get to the fire thong, to replace the broken pieces of bamboo as they break, to easily connect to something. You use this in kiteboarding to connect your bar to your kite, but this is a great one for the fire thong. So we're going to need that one too. So that's a lark's head. And so you need a loop in order to do the lark's head. Now there are a bunch of different knots, but some are more practical than others. And those 3 that I just showed you, especially the clove hitch, it'll be used all the way through the course. And then your figure 8 follow through or double figure 8 follow through or figure 8 on a bight is also useful so that you can untie a knot after it's had pressure if you're trying to place a loop in it. And then that lark's head that I just showed you is extremely useful and quick to tie onto something. So in summary, we did a clove hitch with several half hitches to prevent it from shaking loose. That's going to be beneficial for a lot of our hand drills. We also learned how to do a figure 8 on a bight or a double figure 8 on a bight by going over, under, and back through the top side, and then cinching it down and dressing up that knot. And then we also talked about a lark's head. That's going to allow us to tie onto something and easily untie it and replace something. So all of those knots require visual, kinesthetic, and auditory descriptions. Definitely visual, kinesthetic, and the auditory is a huge plus. But if I had to read and write about this and try to replicate it, that would be much more difficult than combining visual, kinesthetic, and auditory learning styles.